Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. As always, I'm your host, Dean Simon, and before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. We are still on the road to 2,000 subscribers, so if that's a journey you'd like to follow, if that's something you feel inclined to do, please press that big red button down below, and also turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future videos. Okay, so there is a lot to get to with this past weekend for the Milwaukee Bucks. Of course, a packed weekend with two games on Friday and on Sunday night against the Toronto Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll get to each of those games and kind of what I thought through each of those games as well. But first off, just wanted to say that it was tough going into it, of course, without Kevin Porter Jr. for the entirety of the stretch because of that egregious should have been called offensive foul on Cam Whitmore for their opening night game against the Wizards. That just that stunk. So he ended up flying over Bobby Portis's foot. He turns an ankle, and then a little while later, Kyle Kuzma, who has had a pretty solid start to the new year and obviously miles better than what he offered through the last segment of the regular season and in the postseason last year. Leagues better than what that was. So Kuz looked solid, but then he goes and sprains an ankle as well, so he's out for a little bit, and he missed the Cavs game as well. And then Cole Anthony, after a incredible, just like a dominant performance against the Toronto Raptors, he went out with an illness for the Cavs game, so their starting and backup point guard essentially were gone for the game against the Cavaliers in Cleveland, so that was already just like a very tall task. And then missing Kuzma as well for that game, so the Bucks' depth was immediately just completely ransacked at that point. But it got to a point in both the Raptors game and the Cavs game where it just seemed like none of these things really mattered. And of course, in the Cavs game, it was a little different because you saw guys like Mark Sears coming in and getting minutes. But all of that was kind of it was these guys were weathering the storm basically behind Giannis being as dominant as he has been to begin this season. I don't think there has been a game this year through the Bucks' first three games where he's had less than, I think it was 31 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists or something like that throughout the first three. And then of course the last game against the Cavs was ridiculous. But basically the point that I'm trying to get to is that through these two games, of course, it was tough. There were plenty of other factors that were going against the Milwaukee Bucks, but it seemed as though they were able to really just propel right through it, and they were able to put out productive, quality basketball. But in both of these cases, they were going against talented teams, of course, with the Cavs being a little bit more talented than the Raptors. But in that case, we're going to talk about that win against Toronto. And going into it, I was really, really curious to see how Giannis and Miles Turner would fare and the perimeter defenders would fare against uh, a taller lineup that consisted of R.J. Barrett, Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, like just a bunch of big bodies that again like that A.J. Green and Gary Trent Jr. would have to deal with, and then Giannis and Scotty Barnes was kind of the main matchup on the other end. But we saw that actually going into it, I had kind of prophesized that AJ Green would be the real difference maker, and I believe I called for like 14 points or something from AJ Green in the matchup. And actually, if I wanted to just check really quick, I think I had it up somewhere. What did AJ Green finish with in the game against the Raptors? 9. Okay, so never look to me for betting advice ever. That's something that we just learned in that moment. But AJ Green did have a pretty big impact on the Milwaukee Bucks final score and final product of their offense, and the ability to drive and kick. And throughout that game, of course, Giannis again was just his dominant self. I think it was 31, 20, and 7 that he finished with, or something ridiculous. But this was really the not necessarily the coming out party for Cole Anthony, because we knew what he could do going into this game, but essentially it was the coming out party for Cole Anthony, because I while watching the game, I think I put out some kind of tweet or something of that nature, that just like to get my view across that Cole Anthony is legitimately a fantastic playmaker and passer and connective piece kind of guy that really can get the most out of the Milwaukee Bucks shooters, like with his drive and kick ability. And I think in like a tweet that I'd sent out there somewhere, I said that Cole Anthony, he's able to get the most out of the Bucks shooters, AJ Green, Gary Trent Jr., Torian Prince, even Ryan Rollins, Kyle Kuzma. Um, But, who would have thought that if you put him in a different situation than Orlando, where he's just surrounded by absolutely no shooting talent whatsoever and it's just completely lost, like it's hopeless there. Who would have knew that he would be able to kind of raise the floor of a team that has a bunch of great shooting talent? You would have never found out if you didn't get him to a team like Milwaukee, or just more specifically get him out of Orlando. So Giannis and Cole Anthony, that tandem. I think Cole finished with like 23 points, 7 assists, and he was just absolutely killing it towards the second half, hitting huge shots in the fourth quarter to kind of keep the game out of reach. And then, of course, the Bucks ended up taking the 120-116 win. Again, just really a dominant performance from those two. Miles Turner was fantastic from start to finish on defense, blocking shots and just deterring so many shots and actions that led towards the rim for the Toronto Raptors. And he was fantastic. And maybe through the first 2 3 games the shot hasn't really fallen, and he's not as consistent from 3 point range as you would like to see, but you know what you're getting on defense. You know that it's going to be consistent night in and night out, and that's what the Bucks got against the Toronto Raptors. And one thing I'll say is that both in this Toronto game and in the Cleveland game that we're going to talk about, Ryan Rollins really has proved to be, while, also maybe in some games not necessarily knocking down every shot in the world, his defensive ability is just evident, and the impact that he brings to the game and to his team every single night, it's evident. And the Bucks took their first loss of the season, so after a 2-0 start, 82-0 is no longer in play. Now 81-1 still is, and it's very doable. But yeah, the Bucks took their first loss of the season against the Cleveland Cavaliers in Cleveland, and also missing Kevin Porter Jr., Cole Anthony, and Kyle Kuzma, three of their most solid playmakers. Kyle Kuzma has turned out to be a pretty awesome, versatile defender on the perimeter for the Bucks so far. Going into the game, it might have felt like all hope was lost, but with the Milwaukee Bucks, even if it doesn't feel like it, their shooting is going to keep them in every single game that they play, and that's why they're going to be, in my opinion, a real true contender in the East, because on any given night, the Bucks will shoot 47% from three and blow any other team in the East or in the NBA, by that matter, out of the water. So that, mixed with just dominant Giannis being able to be as dominant as he is, getting to the rim with reckless abandon, and just he can impose his will whenever he wants to. This team's going to be very good, and we saw that in this Cavs game. They went down, I think it was 17, 18 points in the third quarter, and then they went down by double digits again, I believe, a couple of times again in the fourth quarter. And Giannis, every single time, was just able to put the team on his back, get them within striking distance, and then AJ Green would hit a nice corner sidestep shot over Jared Allen, and Torian Prince would knock down a three in the corner after a pump fake on DeAndre Hunter, and all these things would add up, and defensive stops would pile up, and that was really a product of, again, of Miles Turner, of Ryan Rollins. Those guys really came out to play in that aspect as well. So it was tough. Donovan Mitchell is certainly a guy that is very hard to stop. And of course, this Cavs offense that's also predicated on opening up looks for their 3 point shooters like Sam Merrill, who had a really hot start in this one. That's the name of the game. And them too, they were missing Darius Garland. So a big loss as well for them. But this was a winnable game throughout the first half. Of course, in the third quarter, it kind of just completely went off the rails. But Giannis was able to backpack, finish with 40, and I think it was what, 40, 14 and 9, and they got some good supporting help from Ryan Rollins, who finished with 8 assists. I think it was like 14 points, 8 assists, one behind Giannis for the team lead. So he was just looking fantastic from also just a drive and kick perspective. And what I loved about Ryan Rollins in that game is that he wasn't afraid to attack the rim against Evan Mobley or Jared Allen or any of the Cavaliers' more high profile defensive types. Ryan Rollins was still kind of fearless in that aspect of just trying to get to the rim. And if he's not trying to make the layup for himself, he's looking to dish it out to an AJ Green, to a Gary Trent Jr. And this is just the name of the game. This is the entire game plan for the Bucks. And it seems as though Ryan Rollins can be a perfect candidate to take that game plan into, when the bench unit comes in. And aside from Cole Anthony, he can kind of be a form of like continuation from or continuity, I should say, from the starting lineup to the bench, with trying to achieve that goal of spacing and driving and kicking and those kinds of actions. It seems like Ryan Rollins is a perfect candidate to also keep those things going outside of Kevin Porter Jr. and Cole Anthony. So moving forward, a battle coming up against the New York Knicks at home, and the conditions or the kind of wait times or injury return timelines of KPJ of oh my God, Cole Anthony and Kyle Kuzma. It's still up in the air. I think if anything, Cole would be the most likely to come back, I guess, sooner because he had been dealing with an injury, and then for KPJ and Kuzma was I think was both sprained ankles. So from that front, maybe expect Cole Anthony to be back a little bit sooner, and maybe Kuz to be the last one back of the trio because KPJ is his injury came in the first quarter of the first game of the season, so he's had a little bit more time to kind of recalibrate. But a tough game against the Knicks coming up against a Knicks team that had already beaten that Cavaliers team on opening night. And though they did actually just take their first loss last night against Norman Powell and the Miami Heat, Jalen Brunson is going to be an incredibly tough matchup, even for a guy like Ryan Rollins. And let's say if a guy like Mark Sears comes in for another 7 to 9 minute stretch like he did in the game against the Cavaliers, he and it's funny because Mark Sears is a guy that I've actually likened a lot to Jalen Brunson throughout the pre-draft process and the whole training camp process. So seeing them potentially have the opportunity to match up against each other, it's going to be very tough for all of the Bucks perimeter defenders, and it's going to be a really tall task. And then of course Giannis and Miles Turner have to deal with Karl Anthony Towns, and then you'll have one-on-one matchups that might not be as suitable for the Bucks, like Gary Trent Jr. on Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby potentially. So, but I think the Knicks might catch a break because they've had guys like Josh Hart, like Mitchell Robinson sitting out of games to start the year with, a myriad of injuries. So maybe from that aspect, the Knicks can also be kind of taken down a peg and it can be a little bit more even. But going into this game, I'm still hopeful because Giannis Antetokounmpo is on this team and anything can happen from that perspective. And hopefully Giannis will be able to kind of bully guys like Karl Anthony Towns a little bit, or if he gets a favorable matchup in the post against a Mikal Bridges or someone of that nature. Hunting switches is going to probably be the name of the game for the Bucks here, and other than driving and kicking. Because the Knicks, as we know, are they might not have been the most productive defensive team last year in terms of a numbers or advanced stats aspect, but of course they have phenomenal defensive talent, and it's going to carry them to a lot of victories this year. And going against a Bucks team that's predicated on driving and kicking, swing passes, quick ball movement, and easy penetration towards the basket, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But I'm still hopeful because Giannis Antetokounmpo can go for 40 on any given night and keep this team in it, just with every second that goes by in the game. So I'm still hopeful going in. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. Once again, I've been Dean Simon, and before you go, leave that like, leave that comment, tell me what you think down below, and subscribe. We're trying to hit 2,000 subscribers, so if you want to, jump on the train and press that button, please feel like doing so. All right, I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.